I've learned that the measure of a man isn't what he drives, it's whether he'll help an old man fix what's broken. My name is Gerald Morrison. Most people call me Jerry. I'm 67 years old, a retired postal supervisor from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and on that particular Saturday afternoon in late September, I was pulling my 1990 Honda Accord into my son-in-law's driveway with news that should have been cause for celebration. The Honda coughed a thin trail of smoke as I eased off the gas. 240,000 miles on the odometer, original engine, transmission that still found every gear without complaint. The paint had faded from dark green to something closer to sage. The passenger seat had a tear in the vinyl that I'd covered with duct tape 3 years back. But she ran. Every morning for the last 15 years, she'd started on the first turn of the key. I'd driven that car through my postal routes in the years before retirement, driving it to my wife Margaret's funeral 8 years ago, my daughter Rebecca silent beside me. I drove it to Rebecca's wedding 4 years back, watching her marry Derek Chen in a ceremony that cost more than I'd made in 6 months of work. The car wasn't an embarrassment to me. It was a survivor. Like me, Derek's driveway curved in front of a 2-story colonial in a development where every lawn looked magazine perfect. His Porsche 911, metallic silver, probably 6 months old, sat gleaming in the September sun. 3 neighbors stood around it, admiring it. I recognized the couple from next door, a younger man I didn't know. Derek stood with his back to me, gesturing at the car's lines like a museum guide. I felt proud. Honestly, my daughter had married well. A man who could afford a house like this, a car like that. Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales, made the kind of money I'd never imagined when I was sorting mail in pre-dawn darkness. I put the Honda in park. The engine rattled for 2 seconds after I turned the key, that post-ignition knock that had started last month. I needed to deal with the radiator soon. The leak was getting worse. If you're watching this from somewhere else in the country, or maybe you're right here in Pennsylvania like me, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And subscribe, because this story is going somewhere you won't expect. I opened the car door. The hinges creaked. I stood, smoothing my flannel shirt, and that's when Derek turned around and saw me. His smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. The laughter that followed his words told me everything I needed to know about the man my daughter married. Derek's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, annoyance, then something theatrical, a kind of exaggerated dismay he projected toward his audience of neighbors. "Oh, Jesus," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Jerry, what are you doing?" I closed the car door. "Came to visit. Brought some papers I wanted to." "No, I mean, what are you doing parking that in my driveway?" He walked toward me, still half laughing, gesturing at the Honda like it was a wounded animal I'd dragged onto his property. "Look at the smoke. You're leaving a cloud." The 3 neighbors had gone quiet, watching. "The radiator's running a little hot," I said calmly. "Nothing serious. I just need to—" "Jerry." Derek stopped about 6 feet away, hands on his hips. "This car is a disgrace to the driveway. I'm sorry, but I've got to ask you to move it. Park on the street. People are going to think we've gone broke or something." One of the neighbors, the man I didn't know, let out a small laugh, caught himself. I looked away. Heat climbed my neck. Not anger, not yet. Just that particular species of shame that comes from being made small in front of strangers. I've been called worse things than broke. I've been yelled at by customers who thought their late mail was a personal attack. But this was different. This was my daughter's husband. I glanced toward the house. Rebecca stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. She'd been watching the whole time. Our eyes met for a moment. She looked embarrassed, but not for the reason I'd hoped. "Derek, I'll only be here a few minutes," I said. "Just wanted to show you both something. Good news, actually. I'm sure it can wait." Derek's voice had that practiced smoothness, the voice he probably used on doctors who didn't want to prescribe his company's drugs. "But seriously, the car situation, it's not a good look. We've got an HOA here, standards to maintain. The couple next door had already started walking back toward their house. The younger man followed, glancing back once with something that might have been pity. Derek turned toward Rebecca, raised his voice slightly. "Babe, your dad's here." She nodded, didn't come down the steps. I stood there in the driveway, my car ticking as the engine cooled. The exhaust had dissipated. The sun felt too bright, too exposing. "I'll move it," I heard myself say. Derek clapped me on the shoulder. "Appreciate it, Jerry. You understand?" But I didn't understand. Not the kind of man who values a driveway's appearance over his father-in-law's dignity. I was about to find out exactly what kind of man he was. $150. That's what my son-in-law valued our relationship at. Less than his car's monthly detailing budget. I didn't move the car immediately. Something in me resisted. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe a last shred of hope that this moment could be salvaged. "Actually, Derek, before I go," I shifted my weight. "The radiator issue. It's gotten worse this week. The shop quoted me $150 for a new one, labor included. I'm a little short until my pension check comes in next month. I was wondering if you could spot me the money. I'll pay you back on October 15th. I watched his face, waited for the recognition that I was asking him for help. Real help. The kind family provides. He laughed, not a polite chuckle. A full, genuine laugh, like I'd told a joke. "Jerry, man, I appreciate the honesty, but..." He shook his head, grinning. "I don't invest in scrap metal. You're asking me to pour money into a car that's worth maybe $300 total. That's not lending. That's charity." "It's my car," I said quietly. "It runs fine except for the radiator. It runs like shit. You said to yourself it's overheating. Smoking." He glanced back toward his Porsche, then at me. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. If you can't afford to drive, maybe don't visit. Take the bus. Uber. Hell, get a car from this century. But don't ask me to subsidize a money pit." The neighbors were gone now. Just Derek and me in the driveway. Rebecca was still in the doorway, far enough away that she could pretend she wasn't hearing this. "It's $150, I said. "It's the principle." Derek's voice sharpened. "You've been driving that thing into the ground for what, 30 years? At some point, you've got to accept reality. The car's dead. Let it go." I felt something shift in my chest. A door closing, the kind that doesn't open again. I'd come here to tell them about Uncle Raymond's estate, the inheritance he'd left me. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. Enough that I'd planned to share it. Derek and Rebecca were family. I'd imagined helping them with the house, maybe setting aside something for grandchildren if they ever came. I'd imagined a lot of things. "Derek, I'm asking you as family, and I'm answering you as someone who understands how money works." He softened his tone slightly. "Jerry, I'm not trying to be a dick, but enabling bad financial decisions doesn't help anyone. You need to make better choices. Better choices." I was 57 when I bought that Honda with money I'd saved from overtime shifts. Margaret was still alive. Rebecca was in middle school. That car had outlasted my wife, my career, and apparently, my son-in-law's patience. "I understand," I said, but I didn't mean what he thought I meant. When your own daughter won't defend you, you learn that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and that changes what you're willing to give. I looked past Derek to where Rebecca stood. My daughter, the girl I'd raised alone after Margaret died, the one I'd worked double shifts for so she could go to college debt-free, the one who used to ride in that Honda's passenger seat, singing along to the radio, asking me to drive her everywhere. "Rebecca," I called out. Not loud, just clear. She looked up from her phone, hesitated. "Are you hearing this?" I asked. I wasn't asking her to take my side, just to acknowledge it, to say something, anything. She walked down the steps slowly. Derek immediately moved closer to her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Possessive, protective, like I was the threat. "Dad, maybe," she glanced at Derek, then back at me. "Maybe you should look into a newer car, for safety. You know, at your age, at my age." The words landed softer than Derek's mockery, but cut deeper. This wasn't a stranger telling me I was old and poor. This was Rebecca, my Rebecca. "Your mother and I drove that car to your soccer games," I said quietly. To your high school graduation. To your wedding. I know, Dad. She looked uncomfortable. But it's not about memories. It's about being practical. Derek pulled her closer. Babe, tell your dad we're not running a charity here. He's got to figure this out himself. She didn't correct him, didn't step away, just stood there in his arms, silent. I've been a father for 36 years, long enough to know when you've lost an argument before it starts, long enough to recognize when someone you love has chosen someone else's side. Okay, I said. I turned and walked to the back of the Honda, popped the trunk. Inside, underneath the spare tire and the emergency kit I'd carried for decades, was a leather-bound folder. I'd placed it there that morning, wrapped carefully in an old moving blanket, protected from the radiator heat that sometimes made its way through the metal. I pulled the folder out, set it against my chest. Derek called over. "What's that?" "Nothing important," I said. I closed the trunk. The folder felt heavier than it should have. Rebecca took a step forward. "Dad, what?" "I'll move the car," I interrupted. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you anymore." I walked past them both, carrying the folder, got in the driver's seat, set it on the passenger seat where Margaret used to sit, where Rebecca used to sit. I started the engine. It coughed, rattled, then settled into its familiar rough idle. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Derek and Rebecca watching me. He looked satisfied. She looked confused. Neither of them understood what had just changed, but they would. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is silence, and what you pull out of it afterward. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't try to explain myself one more time to people who'd already decided what I was worth. "I understand," I said again, looking at Derek, then at Rebecca. "I won't take up any more of your time." Derek's smirk returned. He'd won, in his mind, gotten the embarrassing old man and his embarrassing old car out of his pristine driveway. He turned back toward his Porsche, probably planning to return to his audience of admirers. I walked to the back of my Honda. My hands were steady. They've been steady through worse moments than this. I inserted the key into the trunk lock. It turned with that familiar resistance. 34 years of the same mechanism wearing smooth. The trunk popped open with a creak. Inside, I keep things the way I've always kept them. Organized, purposeful, a moving blanket folded in the corner. My toolbox with the red Craftsman logo faded nearly white. The emergency kit I'd put together when Rebecca was born. Flares, first aid supplies, bottled water. I replaced every 6 months, even though I'd never needed it. Beneath the blanket, wrapped carefully, sat the leather-bound folder. The expensive kind lawyers use for important documents. Dark brown, brass corners, a ribbon tie. I lifted it out, hold it against my chest with both hands. Behind me, I heard Derek's voice change tone. "What's that?" I didn't answer immediately, just stood there, feeling the weight of the folder, the weight of what was inside it, the weight of what I'd driven across Lancaster to share. The neighbors who'd been pretending to walk away had slowed down, sensing something, the way people do when a moment shifts from ordinary to significant. I turned around, still holding the folder. Derek had moved closer. His smirk was gone. He had the expression of someone trying to calculate odds, trying to figure out if he'd miscalculated something. "Jerry?" Rebecca called from the porch. "What is that?" I looked at the folder, at the brass corners catching the September light, at my own weathered hands holding it. "This," I said quietly, "is why I came here today." Derek took another step forward. Are those papers?" The couple next door had stopped completely now, standing on their lawn, watching. I'd planned this moment differently in my mind, sitting at Derek and Rebecca's kitchen table, coffee poured, maybe some of that expensive bakery coffee cake Rebecca liked, opening this folder together as a family, explaining Uncle Raymond's estate, watching their faces light up when they understood what this meant for their future. But plans change. Sometimes they have to. "Yes," I said. "These are papers." I began to untie the ribbon. Derek's eyes were fixed on my hands. He'd gone very still, the kind of still that comes from sudden, creeping realization that you might have made a mistake, a big one. That leather folder held more than paper. It held the future he'd just mocked his way out of. I opened the folder slowly, not for drama, just because my hands are 67 years old, and the ribbon had been tied tight. The documents inside were pristine, crisp, official. I lifted them out, one at a time, holding them so the sunlight hit them clearly, so everyone watching, and they were all watching now, could see. First, a property deed, recorded with Lancaster County, a 3-bedroom colonial in the Wheatland Hills development, about 8 miles from where we stood. 2-car garage, 1/4-acre lot, good school district. I'd walked through it with the estate lawyer 3 weeks ago. Empty, waiting for occupants. The assessed value was printed right there on the deed, $400,000, paid in full. Second, a cashier's check from Fulton Bank, the kind that can't bounce, $50,000 made out to Derek and Rebecca Chen. In the memo line, in my own handwriting, moving expenses. I held both documents up, let them speak for themselves. Derek's face went through changes. Confusion first, his eyes moving from paper to paper, reading, processing, then understanding, then something like panic. Is that? His voice cracked slightly. Jerry, is that a deed? My late wife's uncle, I said. Raymond Kowalski. He passed away 2 years ago. The estate finally cleared probate after 18 months of legal delays. Margaret was his favorite niece. He left her his rental properties. Since she's gone, they came to me. Rebecca had walked down from the porch. She stood next to Derek, staring at the documents in my hands. I sold 2 of them, I continued. Keep one. This one. I tapped the deed. 3 bedrooms. I thought you might want to start a family soon. Good neighborhood. Safe. Dad. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. The checks for furniture, moving costs, whatever you need to make it a home. I looked at Derek. I was going to give you both the keys today. Surprise you. The neighbor woman had her hand over her mouth. Her husband stood next to her, arms crossed, watching. Derek reached out, his hand trembling slightly. Jerry, I pulled the documents back. Not roughly, just firmly. I was looking for someone to give this to, I said. My voice was steady, calm, the way it's been through 30 years of postal work, through my wife's funeral, through every hard moment that required me to stay composed. Someone who understood what family means, what respect looks like. I do, Derek said quickly. I understand. You asked me to move my car because it embarrassed you, I said. You told me not to visit if I couldn't afford to drive. You refused to lend me $150 while standing next to a car that cost you $90,000. The numbers hung in the air. The math was simple, brutal. Derek's expensive pharmaceutical sales job, his Porsche, his HOA standards, versus $150 for his father-in-law's radiator. But I didn't know, Derek stammered. If I'd known, that's exactly my point, I said. The sound of that check tearing was the sound of respect, or the lack of it, being priced. I looked Derek in the eyes, not with anger, not with triumph, just with the clear, simple certainty of a man who'd made a decision and was going to follow through. This was going to be yours, I said. A home, fully paid, $50,000 for furniture, for moving, for starting your family, right? I came here to celebrate with you. Derek's throat moved, swallowing. Jerry, please. I was looking for a man who respected his elders, I continued. My voice stayed quiet, level, not a man who worshipped his status. I lifted the cashier's check, hold it up between us. $50,000, printed in that official bank typeface that makes numbers look more real, more substantial. Derek and Rebecca's names, my handwriting in the memo line. I gripped both edges, and I tore it in half. The sound was louder than it should have been, that thick bank paper resisting, then giving way with a ripping crack that seemed to echo off the houses, the driveways, the perfect lawns. No. Derek lunged forward, his hand outstretched. Wait, please, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I stepped back, holding both halves of the check. They fluttered slightly in the breeze. You didn't know about the inheritance, I said, but you knew I was family. You knew I needed help. You knew I'd driven here to see you. I made a mistake. Derek's voice had changed completely. The smoothness is gone. Now he sounded desperate. Young. I was showing off. I was being an asshole, I admit it. But please. Rebecca had started crying, quiet tears running down her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the 2 pieces of paper in my hands. Dad, she managed. Please don't. I raised my hand gently. Not angry, just done. You had a choice, honey, I said. When he told me to move my car, when he laughed at me, when he refused to help, you could have said something. You could have defended me. You chose his side. I didn't. She shook her head. I wasn't. You were silent, I said. That's a choice too. Derek was still talking, words tumbling over each other. We can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll do better. I'll prove it to you. Just give me a chance. Please. That house, that money. There it was. The truth of it. He wasn't sorry he'd disrespected me. He was sorry he'd lost $450,000. I placed both halves of the torn check back into the leather folder, closed it, tied the ribbon. The deed was still intact. I could reissue the check through the bank if I wanted to, but the gesture felt final in my mind. This was about the principle, not the paper. I held the folder against my chest again. I'm going now, I said. I drove away from that driveway, knowing I'd done something I couldn't undo, but also knowing I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Derek followed me as I walked to my car. Actually, followed me, his voice rising, losing that pharmaceutical sales polish. Jerry, stop. Just stop and talk to me. We can work this out. I'll make it right. Whatever you want. Just tell me what you want. What I wanted was for him to have been different an hour ago, to have been the man I'd hoped my daughter had married. I opened the driver's door, moved the folder from the passenger seat to my lap as I sat down, the same seat where I'd set it earlier, where I'd imagined it staying as we drove to their kitchen table together. Please. Derek reached for my arm. Don't do this. I looked at his hand on my sleeve. He pulled it back immediately. I'm not doing anything, I said. You did it. 2 hours ago, when you choose a driveway over decency. Rebecca had collapsed onto the porch steps, sitting with her head in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. That hurt worse than Derek's mockery, watching my daughter break down, knowing I was causing it, even if she'd helped create the situation. But I'd learned something in 67 years. Sometimes love means boundaries. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to do it. I sat with the folder in my lap, the familiar worn vinyl beneath me, the duct tape on the passenger side, the steering wheel with its grip worn smooth by my hands over decades. Derek crouched down, trying to meet my eyes through the open door. I'll pay for your radiator. Today, right now. I'll pay for a whole new car, whatever you need. I don't need your money, I said quietly. Then what? What do you need? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw him clearly for the first time, maybe. A man who'd just offered to buy his way out of his own character. I needed you to be better, I said. That's all. I closed the door, started the engine. It coughed, rattled, then settled into its rough idle. A thin stream of exhaust drifted from the tailpipe. Through the windshield, I could see the neighbors on their lawn, standing there, witnesses to whatever this was. A family break, a gift withdrawn, justice maybe, or just sadness. I put the Honda in reverse. Derek stood up, stepped back, but kept his hands raised like he could still stop this somehow. Like if he just found the right words, the right offer, he could rewind the last 2 hours. But time doesn't work that way. I backed out of the driveway slowly, carefully. My old car obeyed me the way it always had. As I shifted into drive, I saw Derek standing there, hands dropped to his sides, and Rebecca on the porch steps, her face in her hands, both of them realizing what they'd lost. I drove away. The radiator was still leaking, but I'd kept something more important than a car repair. I'd kept my dignity. That first night alone, I questioned everything, until I remembered that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you require. I sat at my kitchen table until after 9 o'clock, the leather folder in front of me, unopened, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. I hadn't eaten dinner. I wasn't hungry. The duplex I rent is small. Kitchen, living room, 1 bedroom, bathroom. Margaret and I had a house once, but after she died, the maintenance became too much. The loneliness in all those empty rooms became too much. So I downsized, simplified, but that night, the silence felt heavier than usual. I kept seeing Rebecca's face, not from this afternoon, from 27 years ago, 7 years old, gap-toothed, wearing her soccer uniform, standing in our driveway next to the Honda, waiting for me to drive her to practice. She'd insisted on bringing her lucky stuffed rabbit, said it helped her play better. I worked double shifts that year. Margaret's cancer treatments weren't fully covered by insurance. I'd come home exhausted, sleep 3 hours, then drive Rebecca wherever she needed to go. School, soccer, friends' houses. That Honda had been reliable through all of it. And now she was married to a man who called it a disgrace. I opened the folder. I looked at the deed again. $400,000. The house I'd walked through 3 weeks ago with the estate lawyer. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, a backyard big enough for a swing set someday. I'd imagined Rebecca's kids playing there, my grandchildren. The torn check sat beneath the deed, 2 halves that would never be whole again, not in spirit, even if the bank could reissue it. Had I overreacted? Had I let pride destroy my daughter's future over one bad afternoon? I ran the moment through my mind again. Derek's laugh, the neighbors are watching, disgrace to the driveway, the suggestion to take the bus, the refusal of $150 while standing next to $90,000 of German engineering, Rebecca's silence. That last part stayed with me the longest. My phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. Derek Chen, Mobile. I watched it vibrate, let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Same name. I silenced it. Then it buzzed a third time. I picked up the phone, not to answer, just to look at the screen, to see his name there, calling me after what he'd done. 17 missed calls by midnight. I counted them before I went to bed. 12 from Derek, 5 from Rebecca. I answered none of them, but I listened to every voicemail, and what I heard told me everything I needed to know about whether I'd made the right decision. 17 phone calls taught me that regret sounds very different when it's about losing money than when it's about losing respect. Derek's first message came through at 6:30 that evening. His voice had that carefully controlled tone, professional, the voice he probably used with difficult clients. "Jerry, it's Derek. Look, I think we both said some things today we didn't mean. You're upset, I get it. But tearing up $50,000, that's extreme, man. Call me back so we can talk this through like adults." Like adults, as if I'd been the one behaving childishly. The second message, an hour later, had shifted slightly. "Jerry, seriously, pick up. I know you're mad, but this is ridiculous. It was a joke about the car. You're totally overreacting. We need to straighten this out. A joke." The first retreat into minimization. By day 2, the messages had evolved again. "Okay, look, I shouldn't have said those things about your car. That was out of line. But come on, destroying $50,000 because of it? That's not proportional. Let's meet somewhere. Talk face to face. Work this out." Still no actual apology, just acknowledgement that he'd crossed a line, followed immediately by justification for why my response was worse. Day 3 brought a different tone entirely. "Jerry, please. That money, that house, could change our lives. Rebecca and I have been talking about starting a family. That location, those schools. Please just call me back. We can fix this." There it was. The real concern is bleeding through. Not, "I'm sorry I disrespected you," but that money could change our lives. The 12th message, late on the 3rd night, had lost all pretense. I screwed up. I know I screwed up. I was showing off. I was being an asshole. I admit it. But that house, Jerry, that's our future. That's everything. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. Our future. Everything. The inheritance. Not the relationship. Rebecca's messages were different. Her first one was mostly crying. "Dad, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. Please don't do this." The second, "I know you're hurt. I know I let you down, but we're family. The family doesn't give up on each other. Please talk to me." The 3rd, 4th, and 5th, all variations on the same theme. She was sorry. She loved me. The situation was complicated. Derek had been wrong, but tearing up the money was too much. But in all 5 messages, she never once said, "Derek was cruel to you, and I should have stopped him." She was sorry about the outcome, not the cause. Sorry I was hurt, not sorry she'd let it happen. I saved all 17 messages, didn't delete a single one. Sometimes you need evidence, not for other people, for yourself, for when doubt creeps in at 3 a.m. and makes you question your own judgment. Those messages were proof that I'd read the situation correctly. Derek wanted the inheritance back. Rebecca wanted peace back. Neither of them fully understood what I'd actually lost that afternoon in the driveway. When my daughter confessed she'd had the money all along, I realized her betrayal went deeper than silence. It was a choice. The knock came on Thursday afternoon, 4 days after the driveway. I knew it was Rebecca before I opened the door. Something about the pattern of the knock, the hesitation before the second one. She stood on my small porch alone. No Derek, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, wearing jeans and a Penn State sweatshirt I remembered from her college years. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside without a word. She walked to my kitchen, the same path she'd walked 1,000 times growing up, sat at the same table where she'd done her homework, where Margaret had taught her to braid bread dough, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance letter. The leather folder sat at the center of the table. I hadn't moved it. "Coffee?" I asked. She nodded. I poured 2 cups, set one in front of her, sat down across the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I waited. I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes silence is the best question you can ask. Rebecca wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, stared into it. "I had the money, Dad." I looked up. "That day," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "in my purse, $150. Derek had given me cash that morning for grocery shopping." The words settled between us like stones. "When Derek said no," she continued, "when he laughed and told you to take the bus, I had the money right there, in my purse, 10 feet away." My throat tightened. "I could have walked over, handed it to you, told Derek I'd take care of it." She looked up at me, tears spilling over. "But I didn't." "Why?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Because I was embarrassed," she said. "Of the car, of the smoking engine, of you needing money. I was worried what Derek's neighbors would think, what Derek would think of me for having a dad who drove a car like that and needed to borrow money." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. The gesture reminded me of when she was small. "I've become someone I don't recognize," she said quietly. "Someone who values appearances over you, over what's right." I sat back in my chair, processing this new layer of betrayal. It hadn't just been silence. It had been an active choice, active complicity. "I'm not here to ask for the inheritance back," Rebecca said quickly, seeing my face. "I'm not here because Derek sent me. I'm here because I need you to know that I understand what I did, what I didn't do." She looked at the folder on the table. "I failed you, Dad, and I'm sorry. I told my daughter I'd always love her, but I couldn't let her marry into disrespect without consequences." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, past the red eyes and the exhaustion, past the woman she'd become, saw the girl I'd raised, the one who'd stood up to bullies in middle school, the one who'd volunteered at the soup kitchen every Thanksgiving, the one who'd held my hand at her mother's funeral and told me we'd be okay. "I never stopped loving you, Becca," I said, using the nickname I'd called her since she was born. "That was never the question." She looked up, hope flickering in her face. "Then why?" I held up my hand gently. "Because I raised you to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then." "I know. Do you?" I leaned forward. "Because standing silent while someone disrespects your father, having the money to help but choosing not to, that's not the woman I raised." "I know," she said again, quieter this time. We sat there for a moment. The kitchen clock is ticking, the refrigerator humming. "Derek's been obsessed since Saturday," Rebecca said finally, "calling lawyers, asking if there's a way to contest the inheritance, pacing, barely sleeping. Is he sorry?" She hesitated. "He's sorry about the outcome. That's not what I asked." I don't know, she admitted. He keeps saying he didn't know about the money. Like that makes it okay. Does it? No. She shook her head. No, it doesn't. I sipped my coffee. Let that sink in. He's been pressuring you, I said. Not a question. Every day, multiple times a day, asking me to convince you, to fix this. And that's why you're here? No. She met my eyes. I'm here because I need to tell you the truth. About the money in my purse. About who I've become. Whether you forgive me or not. I believed her. I've known my daughter her whole life. I can tell when she's lying and when she's not. We talked for 2 hours. About Derek's obsession with image. About Rebecca losing herself trying to meet his expectations. About the difference between a partnership and a performance. I didn't tell her to leave him. That wasn't my place. She's a grown woman. Her marriage is her own. But I told her what I knew. Don't lose yourself trying to please someone who doesn't see your value. Before she left, standing at my door, she asked, "Is it really gone? The inheritance?" I thought about the deed still intact in the folder, the torn check that could theoretically be reissued. It's not gone, I said, but it's not free either. What do you mean? Derek needs to apologize, not for losing the money, for what he did wrong, for how he treated me. If he can do that, genuinely, then we'll talk. She nodded slowly. I'll tell him. Don't tell him what to say, I warned. If he can't figure it out himself, then he hasn't learned anything. Rebecca hugged me at the door, held on longer than usual. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Becca. I watched her walk to her car, a sensible Toyota, not Derek's Porsche. And I wondered if Derek Chen was capable of the kind of apology I'd asked for, or if his pride would cost him $400,000. Pride is expensive, especially when it costs you a future you'd already spent in your mind. Rebecca came home that Thursday evening, different than when she'd left. Derek could see it in how she walked through the door. Straighter, more certain. He was on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through real estate listings like he'd been doing for days, looking at houses he couldn't afford, torturing himself with what he'd lost. What did he say? Derek asked before she'd even set her purse down. Rebecca sat in the chair across from him, not next to him. He said the inheritance isn't gone, but there's a condition. Derek closed the laptop. What condition? You have to apologize. I already tried that. I called him 12 times, left messages. No. Rebecca cut him off. A real apology. One that shows you understand what you did wrong. Not that you regret losing the money. That you understand why what you said and did was wrong. Derek's face flushed. So I have to grovel? For what should have been ours anyway. And there it was. The same thinking that had caused this in the first place. But Rebecca didn't back down the way she would have a week ago. No, Derek. It was never ours. It was a gift Dad chose to give us. A gift you threw away when you humiliated him in front of your neighbors. I didn't. You did. Her voice stayed calm, firm. You laughed at him, called his car a disgrace, refused to help him with $150 while standing next to your $90,000 Porsche. And I stood there and said nothing. Derek opened his mouth. I closed it. For once, he had no sales pitch ready. Over the following week, the reality of their situation settled in like cold weather. The apartment they rented, 2 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, felt smaller every day. Derek had imagined them moved out by now, into that 3-bedroom colonial, with the updated kitchen and the good school district. He'd already picked which room would be the office, which would be the nursery someday. The Porsche payment came due, $917. It strained their budget the way it always did, but now it felt different, heavier. Every time Derek drove it, he thought about that torn check. Friends asked when they were buying a house. The market was good, they said. Rates were decent. Why wait? Derek had no answer that didn't expose what had happened. His co-worker Brad mentioned at lunch that he and his wife just closed on a place in Wheatland Hills, 3 bedrooms. Great neighborhood. You and Rebecca should look there, Brad said. Derek smiled, nodded, didn't mention that he'd lost a fully paid house in that exact neighborhood because he couldn't keep his mouth shut for 5 minutes. The future he'd counted on, the one he'd spent in his mind 1,000 times, was gone, and slowly, painfully, Derek began to understand something he should have known all along. That future hadn't been his by right. It had been a gift. And gifts can be taken back when you prove you don't deserve them. Sometimes growth starts when you finally see yourself through the eyes of the person you hurt. 2 weeks after the driveway incident, Derek sat in traffic on Route 30. The car ahead of him was a pickup truck. Late 90s model, rust spots along the wheel wells, exhaust pipe held on with wire hangers. It coughed exhaust every time the driver accelerated. Through the rear window, Derek could see the driver, an older man, maybe 70, work-worn hands on the steering wheel, flannel shirt, the kind of man who'd spent his life doing physical labor, the kind of man Derek would have judged 2 weeks ago, would have thought, can't even afford a decent vehicle, but sitting there in traffic, watching those weathered hands, something shifted in Derek's mind. He saw Gerald, not the embarrassment Derek had invented in his head, not the disgrace to the driveway, but a man who'd worked for decades, who'd raised a daughter alone after his wife died, who'd driven that same aging Honda to Rebecca's soccer games, to her school concerts, to her college move-in day, who'd kept showing up, kept loving her, kept sacrificing, despite having every reason to be tired, to give up, to walk away. That car wasn't a failure. It was a testament. It kept running despite its age, despite 240,000 miles, despite every reason to quit. Just like Gerald kept loving Rebecca despite having every reason to walk away when she married a man who disrespected him. The traffic moved. The pickup truck pulled ahead, leaving a trail of exhaust. Derek sat there even after the lane cleared. Someone honked behind him. He drove forward, but his mind stayed back in that moment of recognition. That evening, Derek did something he hadn't done since college. He pulled out an old notebook from a box in the closet, found a pen, sat at the kitchen table while Rebecca was at yoga class, and he wrote, not an apology yet. He wasn't ready for that, just thoughts, trying to articulate something he'd never had to think about before. What is respect? He'd always thought it meant admiration, recognition, the way people looked at his Porsche, at his job title, at the restaurants he could afford. But that wasn't respectful. That was envy, status. Respect was different. Respect was about seeing someone's dignity, regardless of what they drove or what they owned. It was about honoring their struggles, their sacrifices, their character. Gerald had dignity. Derek hadn't even noticed. Gerald had earned respect Derek hadn't bothered to give. Derek wrote for an hour, crossing out phrases that sounded like excuses, trying to name what he'd done wrong in words that didn't make him the victim. By the time Rebecca came home, Derek had filled 3 pages. None of it was ready to show Gerald yet, but it was a start. And for the first time since that Saturday afternoon, Derek felt something other than panic about what he'd lost. He felt shame about what he'd done. That was different. That mattered. Learning who Gerald really was made Derek understand that his apology couldn't be about what he'd lost. It had to be about what Gerald deserved all along. Derek reached out to Frank DiMatteo the following Monday. Frank was 64, worked in pharmaceutical distribution on the logistics side. Quiet guy, steady, the kind of man Derek usually overlooked because Frank didn't play office politics or chase promotions. But Frank had always been kind to Derek, patient, and right now, Derek needed someone who'd lived longer, seen more, maybe understood what Derek was trying to figure out. They met for lunch at a diner near the office. Derek explained the situation, all of it, including his own behavior. He didn't try to soften it or spin it the way he would with a client. Frank listened, sipped his coffee, let Derek finish. So you're asking me how to apologize? Frank said finally. I'm asking you how to apologize, right? Frank nodded slowly. When I've messed up badly, and I have, plenty of times, the only apology that ever worked was when I could name exactly what I did wrong and why it hurt, without making myself the victim of circumstances. Meaning you can't say, I'm sorry I hurt you, but I was having a bad day. You can't say I didn't know about the money. Those are excuses. They put the focus back on you. Frank set his mug down. You've got to focus on him, what he felt, what he lost, what he deserved that you didn't give him. Derek absorbed that. How do I know what he felt? Ask his daughter. So Derek did. That evening, he asked Rebecca to tell him about growing up with Gerald, not the highlights, the daily reality. She told him about the double shifts after her mom died, how Gerald would leave for work at 5 in the morning, come home at 3, make her an after-school snack, then leave again for his second shift at a warehouse, how they'd eat dinner together at 9 o'clock at night, both of them exhausted, how Gerald never missed a school event, not one, not a parent-teacher conference, not a band concert, not a soccer game, even when he was working 70 hours a week, how he'd taught her to drive in that Honda, patient through every jerky start and too hard break, how he'd driven her to college in that same car, helped her move into her dorm, then driven home alone, how he'd paid for her entire education so she'd graduate without debt, how he'd done it by working extra shifts, by never taking vacations, by driving a car that was already old when she was born. Derek listened, really listened, and he began to understand that what he'd dismissed as failure, the old car, the small duplex, the worn clothes, was actually a sacrifice, resilience, quiet dignity. Gerald hadn't been an embarrassment. Derek had been blind. His apology couldn't be about the $450,000 he'd lost. It had to be about the man he'd disrespected, a man who deserved honor. An apology isn't about performing remorse. It's about proving you finally understand the damage you caused. Derek practiced in his car during lunch breaks. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry for what I said. I was wrong." He played it back in his head. It sounded hollow, mechanical. He tried again in the shower that night. "I'm sorry I disrespected you. I didn't know about the inheritance." But that's not an excuse. Still wrong. Still making it about what he'd lost. Third attempt, alone in the apartment while Rebecca was at work. "I judged you based on your car instead of your character. I valued appearance over family. I'm sorry." Better, but it still felt like a script, like something designed to get the result he wanted, rather than express what he actually understood. Derek started recording himself on his phone, listening back, hearing how insincere he sounded, even when the words were right. Rebecca helped him one evening. "Why was what you did wrong?" she asked. "Because I hurt your dad." "No. Why was it wrong? Not what happened because of it. What made the action itself wrong?" Derek thought about it. Really thought. "Because I disrespected a man who deserved honor. Because I treated him like his worth was tied to what he owned. Because I chose status over family. Because I laughed at him in front of people. Because I refused to help him when he asked." "There," Rebecca said quietly. "That's what you need to say." Derek worked on it, refining, removing any hint of, "but I didn't know," or "I made a mistake," or "I hope you'll forgive me." Those were all about him. The apology had to be about Gerald. 3 weeks after the driveway incident, Derek picked up his phone. His hand shook slightly as he scrolled to Gerald's number. It rang 4 times. Derek almost hung up. Then, "Hello?" Gerald's voice, calm, measured, waiting. "Mr. Morrison, it's Derek Chen." Silence. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'd like to apologize to you in person. Not on the phone, not in a message, face to face, if you'll allow me that." The silence stretched. 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. Derek could hear his own heartbeat. Then Gerald spoke. "Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. You know where I live." "Yes, sir. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Gerald said. "I'll listen, but whether I accept it is a different matter." "I understand." The line went dead. Derek set his phone down, looked at Rebecca, who'd been standing in the doorway listening. "Saturday," he said. She nodded. "Are you ready?" "I don't know." He looked at his hands, the same hands that had gestured dismissively at Gerald's car, that had wrapped possessively around Rebecca, while her father stood there, humiliated. "But I'm going to be." He had 3 days to make sure his apology was worthy of the man he'd wronged. 3 days to prove he'd learned what respect actually meant. The drive to Gerald Morrison's house was the longest of Derek Chen's life, not because of distance, but because he finally understood what he'd lost. Saturday arrived the way important days do, too fast and too slow at the same time. Derek woke early. couldn't eat breakfast, spent an hour going over what he'd say, even though he'd practiced it 100 times. Rebecca found him standing by the window at noon, staring at nothing. "Ready?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." They took Rebecca's car, her modest Honda Civic. Derek had insisted, not the Porsche, he'd said when they discussed it. "I'm not showing up in that." She'd understood without him having to explain further. The drive across Lancaster took 20 minutes. Derek's hands trembled slightly on his knees. Rebecca reached over, squeezed his hand once, a gesture of support. She didn't say it would be okay. She didn't know if it would be. They pulled up to Gerald's duplex at 1:58, 2 minutes early. Derek sat in the parked car, staring at the small front porch. "You've got this," Rebecca said quietly. "What if I don't? Then at least you tried." She looked at him. "That matters too." They walked to the door together. Derek raised his hand to knock. The door opened before his knuckles touched wood. Gerald stood there. He'd seen them pull up. He was clean-shaven, wearing a pressed button-down shirt, light blue, tucked in. His hair was combed. He'd given this meeting respect. Derek noticed. It meant something. The three of them stood in the doorway for a long moment. Gerald's face was unreadable. Not angry, not welcoming, just a present, waiting. "Mr. Morrison," Derek said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Gerald stepped aside. "Come in." The small living room felt smaller with 3 people in it. A couch, 1 armchair, a coffee table with a few old Postal Service magazines. Everything is clean, organized, the way a man who'd worked his whole life kept things. Gerald gestured toward the couch. "Sit." Rebecca sat. Derek remained standing. "You can sit," Gerald said. "I'd rather stand, sir, if that's okay." Gerald's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, just acknowledgement. He moved to the armchair but didn't sit either. Crossed his arms loosely. Not defensive, just waiting. Derek cleared his throat. "Mr. Morrison, I came to apologize. I know I don't have any right to your time or your attention after what I did, but I'm asking you to let me say everything I need to say before you respond. After that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it." Gerald studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Go ahead." Derek took a breath. This was it. The moment 3 weeks of work had been leading toward. Either he'd finally found the right words, or he'd lose this chance forever. He began. "The apology I'd waited 3 weeks for wasn't about the money he'd lost. It was about the man he'd finally learned to see." Derek stood in my small living room, my daughter beside him, and spoke. His voice was steady, quiet, but it carried weight. "Mr. Morrison, I disrespected you in front of strangers. I treated you like an embarrassment because your car didn't match my image of success. I made you feel small because I was more worried about what my neighbors thought than about treating my wife's father with dignity." He didn't look away, didn't check Rebecca's face for approval, just kept his eyes on mine. "When you needed help, $150 that meant nothing to my wallet but everything to your budget, I refused. Not because I couldn't afford it, because helping you didn't project the picture I wanted. I chose image over family, status over kindness." His hands were steady now. The nervousness from earlier had settled into something more solid. "You came to give Rebecca and me a future we didn't earn. A house, money, security, and I threw it in your face for a laugh. I judged you by what you drove instead of who you are." He paused, took a breath. A man who worked double shifts to raise his daughter alone after losing his wife. A man who showed up to every school event, despite exhaustion. A man who paid for Rebecca's entire education by working extra hours and never taking vacations. A man who drove a car that barely ran but kept running anyway because he needed it to, and he made it work. I felt something tighten in my chest, hearing my own life reflected back at me through his words. "You kept loving us even when we didn't deserve it," Derek continued. "You drove across Lancaster to share good news, and I repaid that with mockery, with cruelty, with a refusal to help you that said your dignity wasn't worth $150. He stopped. The room was silent except for the kitchen clock ticking. "I'm ashamed of who I was that day, Mr. Morrison, of the man who could laugh at someone who deserved honor, Who could value a driveway's appearance over a father-in-law's feelings? His voice dropped lower. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to give us that house or that money. Those were gifts, and I proved I didn't understand what they meant. I just need you to know that I finally understand what I did and why it was wrong. Not because I lost something, but because you deserved better. You deserved respect, and I failed to give it to you. He stopped talking, just stood there. I looked at him, at my daughter sitting on my couch, tears running down her face, at this young man who'd spent 3 weeks learning what he should have known all along. I sat down slowly, gestured for Derek to sit too. He did. That's the apology I needed to hear, I said. I told him forgiveness wasn't about restoring what was lost. It was about building what should have been there all along. The room stayed quiet after I spoke. Derek sat forward slightly, listening. Not because it gets you the house, I continued, but because it means you understand why you lost it in the first place. Derek nodded. I do understand. Do you? I leaned back in my chair. Because I need you to know something. Respect isn't transactional. It's not earned through wealth or status or driving the right car. It's about how you treat people when there's nothing to gain from kindness, when helping costs you something, when doing right is inconvenient. I understand that now, Derek said quietly. Maybe you do. Maybe you don't yet. Understanding and living it are different things. I looked at both of them. Your relationship with me moving forward doesn't depend on that inheritance. It depends on your choices. Every day, every interaction. Rebecca spoke for the first time. Dad, Derek's been... I raised my hand gently. I know, honey. This is between Derek and me right now. She nodded. I fell silent. I turned back to Derek. You want to be part of this family? Then be family. Show up. Not when it's convenient. Not when you need something. Just show up. Visit. Help when help's needed. Ask about my life. Let me be part of yours. I want that, Derek said. I genuinely want that, Mr. Morrison. Good. I paused. Choose my next words carefully. But I need to see it's real. Actions over time, not words in a moment. Come visit. Bring Rebecca. Have dinner here. Let me come to your place. Talk to me like I'm someone worth knowing, not someone you're trying to win over. How long? Derek asked. Then quickly added, I'm not asking because I'm counting down. I just want to know what you need from me. 6 months, I said. Give it 6 months. Show me this change is real. Show me you've learned what respect actually means. Then we'll talk about the rest. Derek exhaled. 6 months. Okay, I can do that. Not for the inheritance, I said firmly. For the relationship. Because you actually want to know me. To be my son-in-law in more than name. I do want that, Derek said. More than I realized until I'd already destroyed it. I stood. He stood too. You didn't destroy it completely, I said. You damaged it. But damage can be repaired. Take work. It takes time. Take proving yourself through actions, not apologies. I extended my hand. Derek looked at it. Then I took it. We shook. Firm. The way men do when they're making a real agreement. Thank you for the chance, Derek said. Don't thank me yet, I replied. 6 months is a long time. You'll have to choose to show up even when it's inconvenient, even when work's busy or you're tired or there's something else you'd rather do. I'll be here, Derek said. We'll see. But I thought maybe he would be. The inheritance I almost kept became the bridge that rebuilt my family and taught a young man what truly matters. 6 months. Derek came every other Sunday, sometimes with Rebecca, sometimes alone when she was working. The first few visits were awkward. We made small talk, weather, work, safe topics. But gradually, something shifted. Derek started asking real questions about my postal career, about growing up in Pennsylvania, about Margaret and how we met, about raising Rebecca alone. He helped me fix a leaking pipe under my kitchen sink one afternoon. We worked in silence mostly, passing tools, both of us on our backs on my kitchen floor. It felt like something a son-in-law should do. Another Sunday, he brought lumber and we rebuilt my front porch steps that had started rotting. His idea, not mine. He'd noticed them creaking the week before. The visits stopped feeling obligatory. I started feeling genuine. Derek and Rebecca still lived in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. The Porsche was gone. Derek had traded it for a sensible Honda sedan. More practical, he'd said when I asked about it. Better for the family we want to start. He stopped asking about the inheritance after the second month, stopped mentioning it entirely. When I brought up their housing situation once, asking if they'd looked at places, Derek just shrugged. "We're managing," he said. "The apartment's fine for now." That told me what I needed to know. On the 6-month mark, a Saturday in early March, I invited them for dinner. I made pot roast, the way Margaret used to. Rebecca helped with the sides. Derek set the table without being asked. We ate together, talked, laughed. It felt like family. After dinner, I went to my bedroom, came back with the leather folder, the same one from 6 months ago, still holding the same documents. I placed it on the table between us. Derek looked at it. His face changed, not with greed, but with something more complex. Recognition, maybe a little pain. "You've earned this," I said simply. "Mr. Morrison, you've earned it," I repeated. Not through that apology, though it was necessary. Through every Sunday since. Through showing up. Through asking about my life like it matters. Through being family. Derek shook his head slowly. "I don't need it. The relationship, what we've built, that matters more than any house." I smiled. First real smile I'd given him since this whole thing started. "That's exactly why I know you're ready for it." I pushed the folder across the table. "This was always meant for Rebecca, for both of you. Now I know you'll honor what it represents. Not just the money, but the sacrifice behind it, the love behind it, the family behind it." Derek had tears in his eyes. "Thank you, sir, for the second chance more than the house. You earned the second chance yourself," I said. "I just gave you the opportunity." I learned something through all of this. Dignity must sometimes be defended, even when it costs you. Respect can be taught, but only to those willing to learn. And family bonds, when properly tested and repaired, emerge stronger than before. That old Honda still runs, still coughs a bit of exhaust on cold mornings, and I still drive it to Sunday dinners at my daughter's new house, parking proudly in the driveway now, next to Derek's sensible sedan. Derek keeps the two halves of that torn check framed in his office. He tells visitors it's his most valuable possession, a reminder that some costs are paid in pride, and some lessons can't be bought. I look at it every time I visit, and feel something I didn't expect. Pride, not in what I gave them, but in who he became when he finally understood what he'd lost. In the end, that aging Honda didn't teach my son-in-law about failure. It taught him about what lasts: character, respect, and family. Those things don't need a new paint job to matter. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Have you ever had to stand up for your dignity, even when it cost you something? Share your story below. And if you think Derek earned his second chance, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family, respect, and lessons learned the hard way. Because sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to understand what truly matters.